Hello friends, this is Angelica. Thanks so much for joining me here on Scrapbook.com's YouTube channel. Today we are going to be doing some mixed media projects using different pastes and also some exclusive products from Scrapbook.com. So starting with spring flowers, this is what we're going to be using for backgrounds. It's a 3-piece stencil set. I also pulled out some Holtz Crackle paste. I have opaque and translucent paste. And then I'm also going to be using solar paste, and I pulled out lunar paste also. I bought these together because I wanted to know what the difference is between those names. So I swatched them out on black and white mixed media paper just to see the difference on different color papers. The two on the right side, those two colors, those are the lunar paste. And the 6 on the left are solar paste. So you can see that the lunar paste sits on the white paper, completely opaque. The bright pink is so stunning in person. That is Prom Queen. But the solar paste, which is on the left side of both papers, really soft and muted on white and just jumps off the paper when it's on the black mixed media paper. So what I want to do is make some backgrounds just with the solar paste on black paper, and that way I'm going to have a variety of colors to pick from when it comes to die cutting. I love doing this with my pastes, glitter paste, this sort of paste, even texture paste, and just have a variety of papers off to the side that I can die cut when I want something a little different than the pattern paper already in my collection. I started with Royal Flush for this panel. I'm just going to do this panel on screen just so you can see, even wet, just how shiny and metallic that color is. And I did do really thin layers. So now let's look at all of the colors. This one is Golden Hour. Then you have Crocodile Tears, Beluga, Royal Flush, Cross My Heart, and Overheated. So the solar paste looks amazing on the black mixed media paper. Now I want to see what Crackle paste looks like on the mixed media paper. So I'm using Holtz Opaque Crackle paste, which comes out white and it spreads out super opaque. And this time I'm not really trying to do an even layer like I was with the solar paste. I want there to be different thickness of this paste on the paper because I'm going to dry it, and I want to see how thick, what the cracks are going to be with the different levels of thickness. For the drying process, I am going to bring in my travel blow dryer to help the Crackle dry, and I decided not to use my heat tool. I've actually not ever used my heat tool with the Crackle paste. I feel that that's probably going to be a bit too much heat for the paste, so this blow dryer just gives off just a nice amount of heat that isn't too aggressive. And now we have these beautiful cracks on the black mixed media paper, which is just showing the paper that's underneath this paste beautifully. Now I'm not going to use this panel in the video because my project went off into a different lane, as it always does, but I did keep it in the video so you can see what the Crackle paste looks like on black mixed media paper. Now we're going to get into stenciling. So I'm now using the white mixed media paper, and the first thing I'm going to do is prep it with anti-static powder. Once I finish that, I put the panel right onto my Waffle Flower Crafts grip mat. Now we're going to start stenciling. So I'm going to bring those spring flower stencils back onto screen and just quickly show you how they layer on top of each other. I'll place the first stencil on top of the panel, and this is a big reason why I pulled out the grip mat. I love stenciling on my grip mat. You just put your panel down, you put your stencil on top of the panel, and then you just push whatever the outside stencil is onto the mat, and it stays in place. So I pulled out some Distress ink colors to work with. So I'm starting with Saltwater Taffy for the bottom layer, which is going to be the big part of the flowers. The center of the flowers, I'm going to use Abandoned Coral and a finger sponge to add the ink. And I'm trying to work pretty quickly. Distress oxide inks do take a little bit longer to dry than a normal dye ink pad does. And that is why I prepped the paper first with anti-static powder. I want to use the Distress Oxide inks like an embossing ink. So that is why I am quickly doing each layer, because I am not going to use embossing ink over the oxide inks. The oxide inks are going to stay wet enough for me while I'm stenciling. So when I'm done stenciling, I can pour clear embossing powder over the stenciled scene, and the Distress Oxide ink that's still wet will grab onto the clear embossing powder, and then I'll be able to melt the embossing powder and lock in those colors underneath the clear coat. The embossing powder that I'm using is Brutus Monroe Icicle embossing powder, and this clear embossing powder just melts beautifully. Some of the Distress Oxide ink did dry, so the embossing ink did not, or excuse me, the embossing powder did not grab onto all of the Distress inked stenciled flowers, which is fine. That's exactly what I wanted it to do. So I'm going to do a second panel here on screen just so you can see the colors I used, which were fossilized amber, rusty hinge, and crushed olive. I did the same embossing, heat embossing with this panel, and now I'm going to use a translucent Crackle paste by Tim Holtz. This paste has a great texture to it. It's really satisfying spreading it over your panel because it's so lightweight. It's almost like spreading mayonnaise on a piece of bread. And I did make sure to not spread this paste over the entire panel. I did want some areas exposed, and you'll see why in just a moment. But first, I'm going to use my blow dryer again and get this paste dried. This paste does dry faster than the opaque paste, and it dries clear. If you do put on a little bit more thicker of this paste onto the panel, which is where I'm pointing at right now, I learned it from this panel. You don't need to have the paste thick because it's not going to dry clear if it is thick. It's just going to have kind of that milky look to it. Now we're going to do the last step for the backgrounds, and that is adding Distress ink over the Crackle paste. For this first panel, I'm using Scorched Timber Distress ink, and I am just using a heavy hand and blending this ink all over the panel. And all the areas that are exposed is really going to grab onto the Distress ink. Now, once I'm happy with the layer of ink that's on the panel, I'm actually going to bring in a wet washcloth and wipe the panel off. I want all of the ink that's sitting on top of the Crackle paste to go away. So I'm just going to do a quick swipe with my wet washcloth, and that's going to pick up the ink that's sitting on top of the Crackle paste, and then obviously the areas that do not have any Crackle paste will hold on to the ink. And now we have this beautiful distressed, kind of a vintage look background. I'm going to do the same with the pink flowers. This time I'm using Lumberjack Plaid Red Distress Oxide ink to smear over the top instead of a brown ink. And I just love the way that the red looked with the pink flowers. Some of the ink did fall into the fine line cracks, which just gave the panel a whole another level of distress to it. It's really, really pretty. So now I have backgrounds done. I have the metallic papers that are fully dried and ready to be die cut. And I decided I should probably make just some more solid color cardstock or papers too to die cut from. So instead of using a stencil, I am just blending Distress Oxide inks onto 2 panels of mixed media paper. One panel is going to be red and pink, and the other panel will be a couple different colors of brown. And then I'm going to add a layer of the translucent Crackle paste to both of the panels. Now this time I am being pretty careful because the Distress Oxide ink is going to completely activate when this paste hits the panel. So I'm moving pretty quickly, and I'm trying not to pick up too much of the ink. I use my blow dryer to dry the paste, and then again, I'm just going to rub some ink over the top, wipe it off, and now I have my own solid colored panels to die cut from. And talking about die cutting, we're going to jump right into that. I have pulled out my well-loved Tim Holtz mini detailed butterflies die set. I've had this die set in my stash for probably 7 years. I have used these butterflies over and over and over again. They are well-loved. They make the prettiest butterflies, and there are 2 pieces to each butterfly. The top layer will have a lot of detail work to it, so there's going to be a lot of pieces that you will need to poke out, especially if you're using mixed media paper, because this paper is really, really thick. And then the bottom layer is solid, and I die cut vellum paper, Lawn Fawn vellum paper with the solid dies. The last thing that I'm going to die cut are the panels. I die cut probably 90% of my panels with a rectangle die. I'm using the second largest die in Scrapbook.com's nested A2 rectangles die set. I did a lot more die cutting off screen, as you can see by the amount of butterflies I have in my stack and sort tray. And I'm just showing you that there are going to be lots of pieces you do need to get out of the butterfly before you can glue the pieces together. I used a paper piercer to get all of my pieces out. I did have to pull some of them off because this paper is so thick, but you can see they all turned out really pretty, and they just look so nice on top of the vellum. The vellum's not going to take anything away from the detail work from the butterflies. Now we're going to do some stamping. I need some sentiments for my cards, so I'm going to pull some sentiments from Joyful Wishes stamp set. I have paper in my MISTI. I was going to go with the cream colored paper. I decided on white, and I'm stamping with Walnut Stain Distress Oxide ink. I love stamping with Distress Oxide inks, but sometimes the ink will pull on the stamp. So I usually have a finger or a sponge dauber with me so I can even out that ink for my last stamp like I did here. And now I'm going to have just fantastic, crisp images of these sentiments. I trimmed them down, and I am using the smallest amount of walnut stain ink to ink the edges of the white paper so it matches the distressed look of the butterflies and the background. To assemble this card, I did attach the panel to a card base with double-sided adhesive, and then I used my Zero Center ruler by Tim Holtz to make sure I had my butterfly in the center of the panel, and I attached it to the panel with glue. And then I used a 1mm foam strip to add the sentiment, so there was just a little bit of dimension to that sentiment. I did put a few more cards together off screen, and the red solid panel that I had distressed, I had die cut a lot of butterflies out of that panel because I thought the red would be really pretty on the pink flower background. But it turned out that they were really pretty on their own card. So I just made a background of red butterflies and finished that card off with a simple sentiment. And that's going to finish the cards and this video. So if you have any of these products in your stash, especially the mixed media products, I highly recommend pulling them out and playing with them. It's just so fun to experiment and make your own colored papers and backgrounds and then be able to build from that. And if this is a project you would like to try, I will link all of the products I used down in the description. You'll also find a link to Scrapbook.com's gallery where I will have all of my project pictures at, so you'll be able to see all of the project pictures on the gallery, and then I'll also link my Instagram, blog, and YouTube channel down below. That is all that I have for today. I want to thank you so much for hanging out with me. I've had so much fun. Take care, friends.